How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about Michelle Obama's endorsement of Joe Biden for president. Now, this endorsement went all over the place. She meandered through quite a few topics. She was speaking about Trump's response to the virus and racism and so-called peaceful protests, and of course, the Orange Man, because you know, Orange Man bad. This endorsement was so long, it could have been the podcast. You're talking about a half hour straight of her talking at the camera. As a matter of fact, this endorsement has its own name. It's called The Closing Argument. And no, this is not an ad at all, but we got to talk about it because of all the crazy things that were said in it. If you want to see the full thing, I'll link to that in the description box below. In this video, I'll focus on one piece of this podcast, which was focusing on police brutality. And shout out to Tim Runs His Mouth on Twitter for the mashup video. You got to see it this way because it really brings it all together. No, this is not the original video, but it makes total sense when you hear what she is saying. After we get done watching that, I'll talk about what was said there. Then I'll give you the rest of my 2 cents, my deep detail analysis, and then I'll wrap it on up with a nice bow on top. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll it.
They're stoking fears about Black and brown Americans, lying about how minorities will destroy the suburbs, whipping up violence and intimidation, and they're pinning it all on what's been an overwhelmingly peaceful movement for racial solidarity. It's true. Research backs it up. Only a tiny fraction of demonstrations have had any violence at all. So what the president is doing is once again patently false. It's morally wrong. And yes, it is racist. But that doesn't mean it won't work. Because this is a difficult time, a confusing time. And when people hear these lies and crazy conspiracies repeated over and over and over again, they don't know what to think. With everything going on in their lives, they don't have time to fact-check falsehoods being spread throughout the internet. And even reasonable people might get scared. And the one thing this president is really, really good at is using fear and confusion and spreading lies to win.
All right, so you saw that, you heard that. Now, I'm not really sure where to start. There's a whole lot to unpack. As a cool kid say, let's start straight from the very beginning. Her claim of Trump saying that he doesn't want to have minorities in the suburbs because they're going to ruin it. Who said anything about minorities? Who said that? Just because you have low income people does not mean they're going to be minorities. And just because you live in the suburbs does not mean that you are not a minority. All right. I live in the suburbs right now. I'm not in no $1 million mansion or nothing, but I'm in the suburbs. I don't want to have very extremely low income people pull up right next door, okay? Because I don't want the crack smoke, the meth smoke, the heroin needles. I don't want crazy loud dogs, no leash, doodling everywhere. I want to have what I have worked very hard to be able to afford. It's simple. I don't want to have my property value go down. If I was a homeowner and I bought my property for X amount of money, I wanted to not only maintain its value, but also go up in value over the years. You know, I worked really hard, 15, 20, 30 years of my life to be able to afford a place. I want it to have its value. I want to pass it down to my kids, and I don't want my neighborhood to go down the tubes. When you bring in low income people, that can eventually happen. I'm not saying everybody that comes from a low income area is going to be like that, but you're going to have a higher chance of them being like that than you would with those that have worked very hard to be able to afford a house in a higher income area. Very simple. And that whole thing came from Trump saying that he's going to save the suburbs and you won't have low income housing built in suburbs. Now, I did a video on that a little while ago, earlier this year, and she just kind of triggered about that for some reason. I'm not really sure why, because her and her husband, Mr. Barack Obama, have an estate out there in Martha's Vineyard. Now, how would she feel if they built a housing project right next to her property? Okay, you spending millions of dollars, more money than I have. As a matter of fact, Michelle Obama, can I borrow $1? Can I get $5, please, so I can live like you? But I'll move on. They don't want to have a housing project or any kind of low income anything right next to their property. The HOA out there is beyond what we can even imagine as regular normies that don't live in these multi-million-dollar estates. You know, you're talking about a whole administration, a whole board. It'd be the equivalent to a police board out there for the HOA. So I don't want to hear one word, Miss Michelle Obama. And also, you got all kind of gates and fences and whatnot in your Chicago property, if you still got it, to prevent the normies from getting anywhere close to you. So don't even play that game. You are the same as us. You don't want to have your neighborhood devalued by the low income people, but I digress. Let's talk about this whole thing about the so-called peaceful protests, saying that, oh, it's only a fraction of a percent of those that are engaging in the violence. That could be true. Maybe it's true. Not a fraction of a percent, probably about 5%, 10%. But the question is this: how many do you need to really just ruin the city? Do you know that only 3% of Americans fought an American Revolution, and we beat the Kingdom of Great Britain to establish the good old US of A as it stands right now today, back in 1776? Okay, that's why I wear the 1776 on my head, and I got it right behind me on the flags. That's why in the current flag you got 13 stripes on it, because it goes all the way back to that time where we established ourselves as a nation. It only took 3% of us as Americans to be able to do it. Okay, so let's not play this game about, oh, it's only a small percent. They didn't do anything. Come on, let's be for real. Did you see the carnage that's happening all over the nation in Minneapolis, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, everywhere? There's carnage happening as a result of these so-called peaceful protests. Every protest is peaceful until it's not peaceful anymore. A lot of these protests you see that devolve into chaos start off right. And at daytime, everybody's good. We shall overcome. Everything's fine, right? But then as night falls, things get a little bit different. Things get weird. The freaks come out at night. You got all the crack smokers that come out, all the general drug addicts, the lawless people, the Antifa, the BLM, the far lefties that want to just engage in general chaos. They come out and then they destroy. And people's general way of life is ruined. All right, you're talking about, oh, they're fighting for injustice, but how about all the black people that have been killed as a result of all these so-called peaceful protests? Not even just those that have been killed in the protests, but also those that have died as a result of the protests happening. When you had the so-called protests that devolved into looting and shooting and whatnot in Chicago in a downtown area, you had police that should have been out in areas where they're generally needed, where you got a lot of violence happening. They were not there, and instead they were focused on a downtown area to keep that under wraps and to control all those people. And as a result of that, you had the highest murder count in Chicago's recorded history, probably even more than the Al Capone days, because the police weren't there where they were needed. They were diverted away from the general hotspots and down into the new hotspot of all the so-called protesters. All right. That same theme is all over the country. It's happening. And you had this whole anti-police movement. Let's not forget about that. A lot of these so-called peaceful protests are against the police. Anytime an officer wants to do his job and do the right thing, they're getting mobbed by so-called protesters. They are just getting in the way. They're blocking the roads. So you have less police enforcement, less police being proactive in their policing. So you're going to have a 20%, 30% rise in the black on black murder rate all over the country. Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Milwaukee, everywhere. It's happening. So I don't want to hear this whole thing about, oh, they're peaceful protests and it's racism. Where is the racism at? I'm trying to figure it out. We got the platinum plan from the president. You're talking about $500 billion. That is going to help the black community. And even before that, you're talking about lower taxes, lower regulation, the Obamacare tax out of here. Okay. The First Step Act, releasing black folks from the penitentiary that your husband, Michelle Obama, could have freed from the penitentiary. He did okay, but it didn't go all the way. As a matter of fact, you should thank the president for taking what your husband started and just making it better with the First Step Act. You should thank her for that, but you want to just criticize. I'm trying to figure out what Joe Biden would do to help the country, because in her whole closing argument, endorsement podcast, whatever you want to call it, I call it a podcast because it was real long. But in that closing argument podcast, I heard a bunch of just talk about general things that are happening right now in the country. I heard more about Orange Man being bad and his policies, speaking about the virus containment or lack thereof, all this, that, and the third. I heard more about that than I did hear about Mr. Joe Biden. What can Joe Biden do? You've been in government 47 years. What are you going to do on year 48? I'm trying to figure it out. If you didn't get anything done in almost half century prior to 2020, what are you going to do in the next 2 years you got to be living? I mean, I'm just trying to figure it out for myself, asking for a friend. As I close, I want to say this. Michelle Obama's little podcast, I was not impressed. And I think there were quite a few things in there that were false, that were kind of damaging and also disingenuous. So I wanted to come here today and give you my counteraction to that. You may feel differently, and that's fine, but I think I'll leave that right there for now. And what say you? Do you think that Michelle Obama's closing argument podcast was on point? If that's your viewpoint, let me know why in the comments below. Or was her podcast not on point? If that's your viewpoint, let me know why in the comments below. You guys pretty much know where I stand. I did not like the podcast. It was full of just misinformation, things that don't make any sense. You know, and if it's supposed to be an endorsement of Joe Biden, why was there not much said about Joe Biden? It was more about Orange Man being bad in the current state of the nation that is Orange Man's fault. That's what it was about. And also misleading things, talking about minorities. You said minorities coming into the suburbs. Trump didn't say that. Trump said he wants to preserve the American dream, and we're not going to have the low income housing come into high income areas. Okay, you can live in the high income area and be black. You know about that, don't you, Michelle Obama? You and your husband live in the high income area, Martha's Vineyard. You don't want to have the low income area right next to you. If you want that, then you'd be back in Chicago right now. And you have an estate out there, if I'm not mistaken. And like I said earlier, you got a whole big fortress around it. If you want to be around everybody in the community, take that fortress down, take that wall down. Oh, they were the president. They got to have security. Everybody needs security in the hood because it's not safe for anybody. I don't care if you're the former president or a regular normie just hanging out, chilling. Everyone is in danger in a high crime area. Nobody wants to live like that. If you live in a high crime area, your goal should be to get out. Okay, I come from a high crime area and my goal was to get out, and I'm not there no more. So that is the American dream. Okay, you don't want to ruin the American dream by bringing the high crime and high violence area right next to a low crime and high income area. It's very simple. Okay, much of what she said in her podcast can be easily debunked, but whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.